So what I've done here is I've taken Valley Audio's Plateau and ported it to firmware for Noise Engineering's Versio product line. Valley Audio is a company founded by Dale Johnson, and he wrote a implementation of John Dattorro's reverb algorithm for the Plateau. The name of this firmware port is Campestria Versio to fit with the rest of the Versio product line naming scheme. So Campestria means plateau in Latin, and someone on Reddit, I forgot their exact username, but they suggested that and I really liked that, so now this is called Campestria Versio. And also, you can see I have this wooden case. If you like the wooden case and you want to get one for yourself, they're not even that expensive. Check out Koopa Dobra on Etsy. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I will put a link down in the description, and I'll put a picture on the screen right now of his Etsy. He's not paying me in any way, I just really like his cases, so if you like the way it looks too, and you want one, go check him out. So let's quickly go through all of the controls, as quickly as I possibly can at least. There's a lot to go over. Let's start with the mix. This knob, on any of the Versio products, will control the mix. Pretty straightforward. Next, we have the Decay. The Decay controls how much the walls in the room echo. So if you turn it all the way down, it's like the walls are covered in fabric, so it doesn't echo very much. Turn it all the way up. The walls are very flat and shiny, and they echo as much as possible. Actually, it's pretty much impossible for any walls to do this, so this is basically an infinite sustain. If you want like a normal room, then in the middle, maybe, like a normal big room. Next up we have the size. This knob controls the size of the room. So we turn it all the way down. Very small room with a little bit of echoing. Turn up the echo, we can get some really interesting effects. And if we turn up the size, we make the room much larger. I always love doing that because it's like something like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like something dropped into like you're being plunged into the reverb. And then if you turn the size all the way up, you're in a very big room. Next we have the mod speed. The mod speed controls how fast the modulation occurs, and it's kind of hard to explain exactly what the modulation does. The modulation controls... I don't even... Like, reading through the code is hard to understand. It basically changes how the all-pass filters... Like, it changes the phase of the delay lines, if that makes any sense, basically. So yeah, we turn mod speed up. This knob does mod speed. So that's pretty simple. Next, we have this knob. This knob does the mod depth. It also can control mod shape. So currently, we can turn it all the way to 0. So mod speed does nothing. You can turn it up just slightly. You can get a little bit of a vibrato type of effect there. And we can turn the mod depth all the way up. Get some very weird, freaky sounds. But the mod depth can also control the mod shape. So, if you hold down the FSU button, it'll show you the current gain mode for 5 seconds. Then another 5 seconds goes by. These LEDs will come on, and then if you don't confirm and you release while those LEDs are on, and I'll show you what I mean by confirming later on. But if you don't release while those LEDs are on, then it will lock the mod depth to wherever it was with a minimum of 3.125%. So if it was at 0, which it was, it's now locked to 3.125%, and it now controls the mod shape. In the middle, it was the original mod shape, which is a triangle wave. Turn the mod speed up. You can now hear that it's very lightly modulated. You can get a more consistent vibrato, and that's why I added this feature, because you can keep things more consistent. And in VCV rack, 3.125% is the default value. So if you want the default value, turn the mod depth down to 0%, lock it, and then turn it to the middle, and you'll get the default VCV rack plateau experience. In the VCV rack, you can also set it to 0%, so that's why I made that the default way, because of course you can't have it automatically set the knobs when you're using hardware, so you have to do it this way. So yeah, mod speed controls mod speed. This now controls the mod shape. This direction, it's a saw wave. If you turn the mod shape up, get these really crackly sounds. And originally, when I was working on this, I was confused because I was like, surely Valley's Plateau does not sound all crackly when you turn the mod shape up when it's a saw wave, or a ramp wave for that matter. But it does. If you go on VCV rack and you do the same thing, it will sound all crackly. So usually when mod depth is at 3.125%, I like to keep it a triangle wave and keep the mod speed down just slightly, because it sounds the nicest. So if we unlock this, when you unlock the mod depth from controlling mod shape and now controls mod depth again, the mod shape goes back to the default triangle wave setting. And that was a design decision I had to make, because I didn't want people to be playing with this and then forget what mod shape they had set, and then they'd be like scratching their head about why it didn't sound the exact way that they wanted to. So that's why I did that. But regardless, you can turn mod depth all the way up to 100%, then lock it. And you're going to see that you get some really interesting artifacts in there. And I just love that. When I first discovered this while making this, it was so cool. Like, I wanted to make a song with this, but I haven't done it just yet. But yeah, very cool stuff. So let's unlock that again. Okay. So that is the mod depth knob and everything that does. Not that hard. From the GitHub it might seem a little hard, but that's basically all that it does. Next we have the pre-delay. So the pre-delay is down here, this knob. So the pre-delay is basically how long it takes for the first echo to reach you. Yeah, that's basically it. And originally in VCV rack, it can only go around this far. But you can go as far as like 4 seconds of pre-delay. Very fun stuff. And I took special care to make sure that these knobs weren't like scratchy or noisy or anything, and they sound exactly like they sound in VCV Rack, even when you're moving them very quickly. This one might sound a little bit more high-pitched just because I added so much more pre-delay, but if you move it, it sounds basically the same as VCV Rack if you move it for a smaller range. So that is all the easy to understand controls. Next, I'm going to go over the tone knob. So this is the tone knob. The tone knob has a lot of different functionalities, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at first. If this switch on the bottom is to the left, it's controlling something on the input. So if this is controlling the input, and this is to the left, then this is a low cut filter, high pass filter. So as you can hear, it's only letting through higher frequencies. Especially if I turn that to decay. The decay tank, the reverb tank, adds a lot of lower frequencies. So if I turn this down, you can hear those lower frequencies again. This way, which is to the right, the top switch is to the right, this one is to the left, meaning that it's controlling something on the input. Then this is going to be a low pass, high cut filter. You'll only hear low frequencies. There you go. When this bottom switch is to the right, it's controlling something in the tank. So when it's to the right and the top one is to the left, this is a high pass, low cut filter for the tank. You turn up the decay. You no longer get a bunch of lower frequencies from the actual reverb tank. Instead, it sounds a lot brighter. And same thing to the right as on the input. The tank is getting high cut and low pass. Now you've got a lot more lower frequencies. Alright, so that's all the low and high cut filters. Next we have the middle position. In middle position, in this setting, with both of them in the middle, the tone knob controls the tank diffusion. The diffusion is basically how much the sound is scattered in the room so it doesn't sound so consistent. I'll go over that here in a minute because that's how you get the delays that I mentioned earlier. The bottom one is in the middle. The top one is to the left. If that is the case, this controls the volume of the input into the reverb tank. And you might be wondering, why would I put that in there? What's the purpose of that? Well, in the original VCV Rack, if you right-click the module, you can change the input sensitivity to -18 decibels and 0 decibels. So you can get distortions that way in the original VCV Rack. And this is also useful because in some of the gain modes that I'll talk about later, there are a lot of distortion settings, and being able to change the input volume can be Very fun to slowly build a really big wall of distortion in your music while composing it. So I designed this basically to be very performative, with that in mind. And the bottom one's in the middle, top one is to the right. The tone knob controls something in the gain mode. Let's talk about the different modes. So right now we're controlling something on the gain mode. This first mode is a soft limiter. It rarely clips, and that's why I put it there as the default mode. Because if you want just a clean reverb with no clipping, no distortion, then this will be really useful to you. The tone knob in this case controls the threshold. In decibels. So turning it all the way up is basically 0, like there's no sound coming through because the threshold is so low. Next up we have the original VCV rack clipper. So this is a hard clipper. In VCV rack, what it does is when a sound goes through the input, it makes sure it's underneath plus minus 10 volts, within plus minus 10 volts. So if it goes outside that range, then it clips it at plus minus 10 volts, of course. In my case, in the code, the inputs going into here is between -1 and 1. So what I do is I clip it between -1 and 1, and I do a bunch of scaling to make sure that everything, like gain scaling to make sure everything is perfectly the exact same as VCV rack all the way through. So yeah. The input is clipped plus minus 1, and the output is clipped plus minus 1 when the tone knob is all the way down. If you turn the tone knob up, you turn down this output clip value. So here. Yeah, and it can get pretty loud pretty quickly, of course. Originally, it would get much, much, much louder. Wait, no. Originally, it would be quieter. So quiet that you couldn't even hear it at the end. So I did some math to make sure that it stayed like the same volume, but slightly quieter. So like the voltage is slightly less, but the perceived volume is much more, just because it's clipping. So I might actually, after this, make it so it's slightly quieter, because right now it's a little bit too loud. And that'll just be like a tiny change in the code. But yeah, hard clipper. If you turn the decay all the way up, the input volume, Alright, so yeah, in the original VCV rack, having the like infinite sustain, the decay all the way up and the size all the way up, and like turning the input up would result in some pretty intense distortions. So that's why you could hear right there with the tone knob all the way down. In this setting, it was still clipping. And that's by design. That's exactly how it works in VCV rack. That's also why I put the soft limiter. So there are more settings, of course. So this is the same thing. This is mode 3, 2+1. And this is essentially the same thing, but with saturation. The saturation comes right after the hard clip. So it just makes it sound slightly softer. And that is definitely one of my favorite modes, honestly. Definitely one of my favorite modes. My favorite mode, right now at least, is mode 4, which is just a saturation. So basically what this tone knob does is it controls the amount of gain going into the saturation. It's very subtle. Turn the input volume up. And also, if you have the mix down and you're controlling the tone knob, you can also do saturation just on the dry. So what that means, you can take some of your other modules, turn the mix all the way down, and you can use this just as a distortion. And you need to use it as a reverb, which is pretty fun. This is exactly how it works in VCV Rack 2, of course. If you don't want distortion on the dry mix, then you would parallel process it. You'd take your input, you'd route it to a mixer, which I have the Mackie VLZ3 over here, which I use for mixing everything. And then you would take the input route into here as well, and you'd have both the dry and wet signals. You turn it all the way dry. Which is fold back distortion, and this one is really cool because you can get some noise source out of this. So what this is it's a full bridge rectifier, and then it loops back on itself when it gets too loud. So you turn up the input volume. Make it as loud as possible. There you go. You got a noise source. Didn't know that was a thing until like halfway through coding it. So that was fun. Alright, yep. That's fold back. Then we have ripped speaker. I wrote this one myself. So basically, if it goes loud enough, it gets cut to 0, and it stays that way for like, I think it was 1 millisecond, so it sounds very musical. And also, on the cutoff, there's a small amount of low-pass filtering to make sure it's not just a click, it's like more musical. So, yeah. That was fun. Then we have the same thing, but with a little bit of saturation. Then the same thing, but with a hard clipper right before it. And then we have the hard limiter, and then the rip speaker. So you kind of got to turn this up, because the hard limiter turns down audio a little bit. But essentially, the hard limiter adds a little bit of dynamic range to the signal so that the ripped speaker is not as consistent. So that's basically that. Back to mode 1. So that's all the gain modes. And while we're on the topic of the button, let's really quickly cover the other button modes. So if you remember earlier, I told you not to confirm in the confirmation sequence when holding the button down for 10 seconds. But if you do confirm, then it clears the buffer. So it clears the buffer. And it's pretty much instantaneous. You can't really hear it right now because the sounds are so spread apart, but I did a lot of work to make sure that it was an instantaneous buffer clear. So yeah, that's that mode. If you hold it down for 10 seconds in this mode, and then confirm again, now it's buffer freeze. So this freezes the buffers. And of course, there's CV control over everything, so you can CV control the freeze as well. So now you kind of see why I had it so you would have to hold it down for 10 seconds. It's because if you were CV controlling the freeze and you wanted to have it sustained for like, I don't know, 20 seconds, then you would have a really bad time where it would keep switching modes all over the time. Unless you had a really irregular clock or a really irregular CV control on the FSU, it would be very, very unlikely you would switch modes ever. CV controlling the FSU, so that's why I did it that way. Yeah, that's pretty much everything so far. I decided I wanted to make just a couple slight changes to the firmware before making the video public. Things that I would have liked to see in Campestria Versio. So essentially what I've done is I've taken the Diffusion and changed its controls just very slightly. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, using the Diffusion, you can turn the Campestria Versio into a delay. So right now I will demonstrate how to do that. So let's turn up the mix. When both switches are in the middle position, you are controlling Diffusion. By default, it's at 100% with Diffusion on the input. First, let's go over how to turn Diffusion on and off on the input. So if you're starting at 100% and you pass by halfway, the LEDs will come on to tell you that Diffusion is now off on the input. You can now turn Diffusion to 100% while Diffusion is off on the input. In addition, you can turn Diffusion to 100% to near 0% with Diffusion on. As long as the LED doesn't come on, you know that Diffusion is still on. And you can be at near 0 with Diffusion off on the input, and then turn it to 100%. So originally, when I was coding this, I had the misconception that Diffusion only occurred on the input, but it actually occurs in the middle of the tank as well. So that's why changing Diffusion with Diffusion off on the input still has an audible effect on the sound. So I will slowly go through the different diffusions so you can observe what the changes in the audio are. Yep, that's the Diffusion. Now, the other thing I changed was the pre-delay. Someone on Mod Wiggler said that dialing in low amounts of pre-delay was difficult because of the larger range. So what I did was I just took knob value times knob value, because knob values go from 0 to 1. It's a decimal. So lower values change slower than higher values, which makes it a lot easier to dial in. I know I said earlier in the video that I might change how loud some of the gain modes were. Did not bother with that. I just decided to leave it the way that it is. Just was less stress on myself. This was literally maybe like 5 minutes worth of changes right here. So there you go. That's everything. Thanks for watching.